Competition is a big part of video games. Sometimes it's competing with another player. Sometimes it's trying to beat a high score. But a lot of the competition could be between two IPs. Now, it's not uncommon for video games to rival. Street Fighter has a rivalry with Mortal Kombat. God of War seems to have a rivalry with Halo. Even probably Final Fantasy and Tales of, for all we know. Point is, the biggest video game rivalry has to be between Super Mario Bros. And Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, Mario's first appearance was back in 1981. He was the main character in Donkey Kong, back when he was known as Jumpman. He eventually got his own Super Mario Bros. Game in 1985 on the NES, barring previous appearances. It was around that time where he kind of took off. He did take off. He was like a big star. It revolutionized video games at the time, led to sequels like Super Mario Bros. 2 and 3, led to Nintendo creating new IPs such as The Legend of Zelda, Kid Icarus, and Metroid. It was a big success. Sega wanted that type of success when they launched the Sega Genesis back in '89. And their first attempt at competing with Mario was with Alex Kidd, but the franchise didn't really last long, it didn't pick up. Then came the idea of Sonic the Hedgehog, and that picked up. Sonic was immediately popular. He went on to get sequels, and he was, for all intents and purposes, Mario's true rival. Sega found a lot of success at the time, generating more IPs such as Virtual Fighter and Streets of Rage, while Mario, at the time, with the Super Nintendo, had Super Mario World. The competition was pretty fierce. It wasn't even just limited to video games. After all, both franchises had their own shows. Mario had the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, while Sonic had two shows: Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic Sat AM. It's funny that there were two shows, but it wasn't really much of a competition thing because both shows are owned by the company Deke, so it'd be kind of strange if that was an internal rivalry. But you never know. Then came the movies. At the time, Mario had that one movie that no one really likes. It was a really poor adaptation. Sonic had the OVA, which was obviously better than the Mario movie. His OVA had some issues, had the one meme line, "Strange, isn't it?" But beyond that, it was a pretty decent movie. So, and it was pretty well liked to this day. But things just didn't go so well for Sonic after a while. In the mid 90s, a year before the N64 came out, Sega was releasing the Sega Saturn. Now, it originally came out in Japan, it did moderately well, and it was being brought to the West. Well, a few things screwed it over. One, it had very little marketing. When it came out, it was just probably marketed the day before it came out, which is not a good idea when you're trying to release a console. And on top of that, they barely released any first party games. They didn't release a Sonic game. I believe the Sonic game planned for it was supposed to be one that would introduce the Freedom Fighters from Sat AM. It never came to fruition. Kind of sad for me, but at the same time, better that the Freedom Fighters' first appearance was not on a pretty much obsolete system. And what hurts more for them is the fact that they charged $3.99, which was pretty expensive at the time. So yes, Sega really screwed up. Really should have listened. Japan really should have listened to Sega of America. But then of course the N64 came out, but the real competition at the time was PlayStation. But it didn't stop the rivalry. Sonic did release his Sonic Extreme game, while Mario had Super Mario 64. And of course, Super Mario was doing better. The N64 in general was doing better. Their main competition was PlayStation. You had Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time basically competing with Final Fantasy VII. But the point is, that was more PlayStation's victory than Nintendo or Sega. So in '98, Sega tried once more with the video games. They released the Dreamcast, had popular titles such as Shenmue and Jet Set Radio, but the biggest ones, of course, were Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. it was, and you will hear fans say Sonic had a rough transition into 3D. Not those two games specifically, but it was around the time where Sonic had a really bad transition. That doesn't stop the fact that those games were very popular, very beloved by fans. Even to this day, they're both considered among the best of the Sonic games. Unfortunately, the Dreamcast didn't last long because with the PlayStation 2 out, and then you had the GameCube out, and then you have Xbox coming into the market. Sega figured go third party and save some money because at this point, even GameCube was struggling despite having games like Super Mario Sunshine and Legends of the Wind Waker. PlayStation had God of War and Ratchet and Clank, so and plus anything else PlayStation probably had, and then you have Xbox taking the role by storm with Halo. So Sega cut their losses and decided to go third party, and they re-released the Sonic Adventure 1 and Sonic Adventure 2 for these systems. Well, GameCube, actually. Funny enough, that their first third party console was a Nintendo console. Sonic Heroes is when they went multi platformed. It was PlayStation 2, Xbox, and the GameCube. And you could argue that maybe that was the signification that Sonic kind of lost, but not yet, I would say. Because Mario and Sonic, I feel like, have still had their rivalries. Games, media, comics. I mean, Mario had that short lived Super Mario Adventures comic in Nintendo magazines. Sonic had the Archie comics. He had other comics, but the Archie was the most popular one. Um, I think Sonic still tried to compete with Mario in different ways, but even without a console, and despite things looking bad, you could say that Sonic fans didn't give up just yet. But Sonic Heroes was not that well received, unfortunately. I mean, it was a good game, but it wasn't great. Um, and then things just got bad later. Because Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 happened. And everyone will tell you what a mess that game was. Story wise, good game. Whoever wrote that story was pretty great. Had a few plot holes and inconsistencies, but it was still a pretty good game. The only thing I didn't like was the English voice acting for Sonic and Rouge, but beyond that, the story was still good. The gameplay atrocious. It was so glitchy, and on top of that, it was supposed to be an anniversary title. So yeah, happy anniversary, Sonic! You got a crappy game. That really messed Sonic up. Meanwhile, Mario has Super Mario Galaxy, and that's like the big innovative game. And then, like a couple years later, they released New Super Mario Brothers Wii, which was another big game for them. You could say that it aged well, but it did well enough at the time. And then, I mean, I think the only struggle Mario had on the Wii was probably Super Mario Galaxy 2. I don't think anyone really talks about that anymore. Me personally, I only played like a few levels, and it didn't really catch my interest. But yeah, Sonic just had it bad. I think the best thing that happened to him, ironically, was when the rivalry was put aside for the Olympics. That's right, Sonic and Mario at the Olympics game happened. It was the first time they were featured in a game together, and it was a big deal. Now, I don't think the thing is, it feels wasted that it was an Olympics game because whose idea was that? That was such a weird concept, and I feel like even with the Olympics, they dropped the ball because it became an annual thing, but every game was the same roster. It was always the same, like I think the second Olympics game added new characters, and then beyond that, they just stopped adding new characters. Like, you have a big crossover like this, you're going to stick with the same 10 characters on each side or whatever. Bogus. I think the biggest thing that happened to Sonic was when he got into Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Now, Sonic was the second non-Nintendo character in Smash, the first one being Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid. But Sonic being in Brawl broke the internet. It was the one of the it was a time probably the biggest reveal you could have had for Smash Brothers. The only ones that probably came close were Cloud Strife for Smash Wii U, and then Smash Ultimate with characters like Joker from Persona 5, Steve from Minecraft, and even Sora from Kingdom Hearts. But Sonic broke the internet first. And it shows that despite his struggles, people still love Sonic, and Sega did not give up yet. They came out with Sonic Unleashed. It was like hit or miss, because gameplay wise, good game. Daytime levels, amazing. It had the boost mechanic, it worked. Nighttime levels, not too bad, but they were. I feel like they kind of dragged on a bit, and they just got really repetitive. So that ruined the game for me a little. I'm sure others probably felt the same. And then the whole find the medals thing. That was like the one of the worst mechanics I've played. Like that ruined the fun for me. It was still a good game story wise. Again, I wasn't fond of Sonic's English voice acting at the time, but Japanese exists, so that's fine. Sonic also had the storybook games, both of which were you had the Sonic and the Secret Rings, and Sonic and the Black Knight. Good, well written games, just horrible controls. And Black Knight was kind of weird because Sonic using a sword just seemed unusual. He's got super speed. He's stronger than a sword. He didn't need a sword, but well. Then, but then things just got bad for Sonic because it just went really bad. It's kind of a shame that Sonic he had like this exclusivity deal for Nintendo for a while. Not the worst thing in the world. Resident Evil did it, like when they started with Resident Evil Zero on the GameCube. At the time, that was Nintendo trying to pick things up, but Sonic doing it was probably a bigger deal because it seemed even more that Sonic lost the console wars. And didn't help that Sonic at the time was written in the West before in Japan. And things just went down for Sonic. I mean, 2010s, not easy. He had like a bunch of bad games. Well, not bad, but underperforming games. Like, yeah, Lost World, which people said was Super Mario Galaxy. That was kind of a weird thing to say, but I can see the Mario references because it uses biomes similar to Mario. Sonic's Archie comics just went under, unfortunately. And then it just it was not easy being a Sonic fan for a while. Sonic Forces for a lot of people was just another big failure. I mean, considering it came out not too long, it came out the same year as Breath of the Wild, Splatoon 2, Persona 5, and then you have, of course, Super Mario Odyssey. It wasn't. I don't even know what to say at this point. It's like the rivalry. You don't want to see this. You don't want to see Sonic just fall so low. Um, you wanted to. The rivalry was kind of fun in a way, but it just became less about Nintendo does what Sega does when Nintendo don't, and more about which one could do better. It became a bit of a friendly rivalry, and you need Sonic to be at his best for it to be a good rivalry. What? Here's the difference between Sonic and Mario that's really important in a way too. Sonic games are a little more deep because they have characters. The characters have more personality than you would find in a Mario game. Mario games usually aren't so deep. The characters are beloved, but they aren't that deep. Not to say they can't be story games. You have the Mario Luigi games, which are story driven. You have Super Paper Mario, which is probably the deepest Mario game because you play this game, you forget it's a Mario game because of how deep it gets. Sonic, for that, is a norm, so you expect certain things done with Sonic. What struggled with Sonic was that once he was written more in the West, they tried adapting a bit of his way past cool, or Sonic Juice and Jam, and stuff like that. His sad AM attitude, his Western comics, where he was too cool. Yeah. It's like Sonic, he's not supposed to be like that. He's a pretty humble guy. He's uh, that's a whole other video to explain Sonic's character, but Sonic's much even funny thing is that both Sonic and Mario kind of stationary. They have flat character arcs. They influence others around them. It's not as notable with Mario because Mario characters don't have that type of development, but it's much more noticeable with Sonic. Here's my thing. The reason Mario does well is because Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan are more in sync. Sonic does not have that. Sega of Japan and Sega of America, they're not in sync with each other. We had so many flops for Sonic for so long that they didn't really get good until Sonic Frontiers. Surprisingly, since that was written in America first, but at least it was written originally in Japan by a Japanese writer who understood Sonic, and it was just adapted into English and then translated in Japan. So, my thing, why don't we just let Japan write Sonic from now on? Like, I feel the same way about Resident Evil, and I don't want to diss American writing. We got God of War Ragnarok. That's great writing, but certain Japanese franchises, they gotta stay written by people who understand these characters. We've There's probably people in the West who understand Sonic, but the West has this weird idea what Sonic is. They kind of get his character wrong, and it's ironic for me to say this because I like Sonic's at AM. I like the characters from there. I will love to see Sally Acorn appear in a Sonic game, but at the same time, I just want Sonic to just be given the same respect that Mario has. I want his friends to get that respect. You see how his friends get treated in the IDW comics. You see how some of them written nowadays, they kind of get treated like jokes or whatever. IDW screwing up Silver just to make this sheep girl look better than she is. That is not okay. Um, hey, yeah, I'm gonna the whole comic thing is another video, but still, the best thing that happened to Sonic was probably Sonic Frontiers and then Sonic Superstars. Sonic Superstars coming out around the same time as Super Mario Wonder. The rivalry came back, but at that point, are we trying to decide which one's better, or are we getting them at the same time? I got them at the same time because they're both good games in their own way, and you want to make a fun little competition about it, fine, but at this point, if you're trying to say one's better than the other, then you're just trying to force a rivalry that really isn't that intense anymore. The only other thing they could have rivaled with was the movies, because recently we had the two Sonic movies, both did really well. I would say the Sonic movies, they need to chill with the pop culture references because it's getting annoying and no one's going to care in like 10 years. Mario movie did better, it's had much more game stuff, music, whatever. Sonic movies focus more on the game characters, less on the human characters. Mario movie try to just focus a little more on plot and try not to be too generic. I mean, it was fine for the first movie, but you got to do a sequel. You got to step up. But yeah, that's just me talking about Sonic and Mario. I'm gonna leave it at this, and we'll talk to you another time. This is Stormy Dash signing off. Have a good day.